conglomerate. There was, of course, the Grateful Dead, the band Garcia played with for 3 decades. The Dead, by 1995, were the biggest grossing musical act going, upwards of $50 million a year in concert revenues. Then there was Garcia's own band. And then there was the Cherry Garcia ice cream from Ben & Jerry's, to which he lent his name. And then there was the neckties, the artwork, and the memorabilia as well. Well, when he was married for the third and final time on Valentine's Day 1994, Jerry Garcia was a wealthy man, and his widow, Deborah Coons Garcia, is seeking to protect what he left behind. From Mountain Girl, Carolyn Adams Garcia, Jerry's second wife, who's come to court to make sure that a promise she says her husband made to her when they split is on.
Now, did you have another meeting with Hellman in February of 95?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of that meeting? And was that at his office?
Yes.
Just you and Jerry?
Yes.
All right. What was the purpose of that meeting?
I had become aware in February that Jerry's finances were actually in quite a precarious state because of several things that happened. And so I was concerned about it, so we went in to discuss it.
Okay, well, what had happened?
Jerry had been renting a house in Tiburon, and it was a very funky house, and it was going to be put on the market. And I said to Jerry, if this is put on the market, we should buy it for you as an art studio because it's a great house. And then in February, we went on our belated honeymoon in January, and we got home, and David Hellman called me up at my office and said, come by the office and sign a quit claim for the Tiburon house. Jerry wants to buy it. And I said, first I said, well, you know, we're married, so, you know, we'd buy it together. And then I said, how would this impact our remodel? And he said, oh, you won't be able to do the remodel. So when I saw Jerry that night, I said, you know, if you want to buy this house in Tiburon, we're not going to be able to do our remodel. And he said, then I don't want to buy it. And I said, well, you already signed the contract and put $25,000 in escrow, which David Hellman had told me. He said the contract was signed and there was $25,000 in escrow. And Jerry
Hellman
said,
told you that when you spoke to him?
When I talked to him earlier in the day. And Jerry said, I never signed a contract and I didn't put $25,000 in escrow. And then what I realized when I did research, that David Hellman had used Jerry's power of attorney to sign the agreement to buy the house because Jerry's assistant at the time had told David Hellman, sure, Jerry wants to buy the house. And we lost the $25,000. And so I asked David Hellman, you know, how's the financial situation? He said, well, Jerry doesn't have any money right now, but this was February. Jerry had already borrowed all the money from his Grateful Dead spring tour.
Now, let's get this straight now. We are in February of 95?
Yeah, February of 94. No, 95, you're
95.
right.
And his spring tour was to have begun when?
In March.
In March. And how long was his spring tour to be?
3 or 4 weeks.
3 or 4 weeks. And is it, you're saying that he had already borrowed whatever he was supposed to make on the spring tour?
Yes.
And what had become of that?
Well, I don't know.
All right. And
so,
what was the rest of that conversation?
So David Hellman's plan was to borrow $200,000 from the $300,000 that Jerry would make after taxes from the summer tour for the down payment for the house in Tiburon, and then to borrow an additional $600,000 mortgage on the house. And
so just a minute. So Mr. Hellman was recommending that Jerry also commit his compensation for the summer tour as well by borrowing the money from a bank which he could pay back with the summer tour money. Is that it?
Object. First of all, it's called, there's no foundation for this witness to testify to this. Secondly, the relevance of this is highly questionable. The contract between Jerry and Carolyn was entered into in May of 1993. Mr. Camara, by leading questions, is asking this witness to testify to a series of transactions which, if I understand
Well, it's
correctly...
relevant on the issue of his financial circumstances because the contract, or the alleged contract, was executed in May. But the payments didn't begin later that year. There was a question of the arrearage, and the whole situation about his finances is relevant. It's overruled.
Would you explain again what the recommendation regarding the summer tour was, so I can't be said to be leading?
Okay. What we found out was that Jerry had already borrowed everything he was going to get from the spring tour, and that in order to buy this house, which Jerry didn't even really care about buying, David Hellman intended to borrow $200,000 from the Grateful Dead from the $300,000 after-tax dollars that Jerry was going to make on the summer tour for the down payment on the house, and then to take out a mortgage for $600,000.
To mortgage the house?
To mortgage the house.
$200,000 down.
Yeah. So it was another, basically, Jerry was going to go into debt another $800,000, and when we were at the meeting, Jerry kept saying, I don't want to do this, and David Hellman was trying to convince him to do it, and I just became very alarmed because it just seemed like, and the house was funky, it needed $25,000 roof right away. I became alarmed because this was the advisor, and it just seemed like it was not very good advice, especially.
We'll take a break. We'll come back and see what cross-examination yields. And remember, before the day is done, a member of the Grateful Dead band. Stay with us. Money and love are a strange and sometimes explosive mixture. It's certainly proven to be so in the battle over the estate of the late Jerry Garcia, the former leader of the Grateful Dead band. Garcia died in 1995 in August, and he left behind an estate of undetermined size, but there was still money coming in. His third wife, among other things, decided to challenge an agreement he had allegedly made with his second wife to pay her $5 million over 20 years. We've been bringing you that hearing live. Court is adjourned for today, but we're showing you some highlights of testimony given earlier today and earlier this week. Right now, on the witness stand, Deborah Coons Garcia, the third wife, being cross-examined by the lawyer David Phillips, who represents the second wife.
On Monday, I believe you testified that about the time of your marriage to Jerry Garcia, you undertook to investigate his financial circumstances. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. You did it at some later date?
Yes, I would say approximately a year after we'd been married.
Right. And so this was sometime in 1995?
Yes.
You were present, of course, when Mr. Schiller was deposed.
Yes.
And you recall, do you not, that Mr. Schiller testified in your presence that he had been told by you...
I'm going to object. This is not a proper cross-examination from what Mr. Schiller said.
Well, I'd like to refresh your recollection on that subject.
There's been nothing shown yet that she needs refreshing on.
Well, you're going into the area of examination of the finances?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'd allow it overruled.
Okay. Do you recall that when Mr. Schiller was asked about information that he had received from you, the question was, what did she say to you, referring to you, about the medical condition of Jerry Garcia? And the answer was, I recall that there was a discussion with respect to his ability to continue touring, in effect guaranteeing performance income, that his financial condition was very, very bleak in the 1993-1994 period. Do you recall that testimony?
I guess so.
Okay.
I mean...
You don't have to guess.
Well,
You're asking her if she recalls Mr. Schiller's testimony.
Yes.
Well, you either do...
I remember that he said those things.
Okay. And had you said to Mr. Schiller that Mr. Garcia's financial condition was very, very bleak in the 1993-1994 period?
I don't remember saying that to Mr. Schiller.
Okay. In any event, whenever...
I mean, I know Jerry had debts. I don't know what Mr. Schiller meant by that, but that Jerry had been living on borrowed money and had lots of financial obligations.
In any event, you reached a conclusion at some point after your marriage that Jerry Garcia had no savings. Is that true?
That was what Mr. Hellman told me in the spring of '95.
But you've testified here on the stand in your direct examination that you had reached a conclusion that he had no savings. Is that correct?
Well, David Hellman told me that, and I concluded it after I said, does Jerry have any savings? And David Hellman said no.
Okay, so whatever you said was based upon what somebody else said to you.
Well, what Jerry's financial advisor had told me.
Okay, and you testified that one of the reasons why this financial condition was poor, or however you termed it, that it was because he had to pay Carolyn Garcia some $20,000 a month. Is that correct?
Well, he had lots of financial obligations. That was one of many things.
All right, and that he was paying, I believe your conclusion was, to Menasha Matheson something like $10,000 plus a month. Is that true?
Well, more than that. That was just the support payments. In addition, there was the house, there was the legal fees, school fees, vacation fees.
And there was there not another significant amount that Jerry Garcia was dispersing monthly that you were familiar with? Do you know that?
I'm not sure. I mean, there was a lot going out.
How much was he dispersing to you, Mrs. Garcia, in 1994 and 1995?
Not much. I was paying my own, both of my house mortgages myself, and then Jerry was paying for everything else. He was paying for me to accompany him on the road. He was paying architect's fees,
well,
you know, that sort of thing.
You recall that you filed a petition for a family allowance in the estate, did you not?
Yes.
And do you recall how much you represented to the probate court that Jerry Garcia was dispersing on your behalf?
I can't remember.
May I finish my question?
Mm-hmm.
In 1994 and 1995? Do you recall how much you
I don't
represented?
recall the exact, I think maybe
Okay.
25, 20, I don't remember the
Okay.
number.
Well, let me assist your recollection in that regard. Your Honor, I have a group of additional exhibits that are pre-marked that I'm going to leave for the one set for the court, one set for the court, and one set for Mr. Camara.
Just for the record, these are W 31, 32, and 33.
Yes.
And why don't we just state for the record what each one is so we have it?
Yes, Your Honor. The W-31 is petition before inventory for family allowance. And I should say it's a verified petition. W-32 is a declaration of Deborah Coombs Garcia and David M. Hellman, co-executors, as to financial conditions of the estate. And that's filed. The first document, W-31, was filed in the probate proceeding on April 25th, 1996. The declaration, that's W-32, of Mrs. Garcia, was filed on April 26th of 1996. And finally, is a W-33, is petitioner's memorandum of points and authorities in opposition to respondents' request for fees, costs to fix scope of hearing, filed in this proceeding, as was W-32, on April 26th of 1996. And I'm going to, with the court's permission, add these to the petitioner's exhibits in the book that's before the witness. The witness book is left there from Monday, Your Honor.
All right, then these exhibits will be marked for identification at this time.
All right. Now, Mrs. Garcia, referring to W-31, in order to assist your recollection on the subject of what was being dispersed to you during 1994-95, first of all, if you look at the, about the middle of it, you'll see the verification. You see a verification in that document? Can you locate that? It's immediately after the petition itself.
Excuse me, could you repeat
If you
that?
will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The 9th page along in that document.
Yes.
Okay, and you see that to be your statement that the petition is being filed, that you've read the petition, know the contents, that it's true, and that it's being filed under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Okay, and what date was that signed?
22nd of April.
Okay, and now to assist your recollection, with respect to the amount that was being dispersed to you, would you please look at the 3rd page and the carryover paragraph?
You want me to read it?
Do you see that? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And how much did you represent to the court that in 1994 and 1995, Jerry Garcia was dispersing to and for your benefit?
$22,000.
Okay.
Well, if you've been following this hearing, I'm sure you know what's coming. Some cross-examination designed to show a disparity between this witness's claim of what the estate could afford to pay Carolyn versus what it could afford to pay her. You stay there. We'll be right back with this and Phil Lesh, a member of the Grateful Dead band. Stay with us.
If the hassle of paying your bills puts you off balance, don't get sideways.
Get Quicken.
With Quicken, the easy way to keep all your finances straight. Quicken software works just like a checkbook, makes check writing a snap. Now it's easy to see exactly where your money goes and balance your checkbook in minutes. When you're on top of your finances, your life is clicking.
Get Quicken with Quicken.
My mama comes over and says, Lemon, didn't I teach you nothing cleans like Pine Sol? I said, Mama, I use Lemon Fresh Pine Sol. It has the power of Pine Sol with a fresh lemon scent. Mama says, honey, you can take your Lemon Fresh Pine Sol and clean my house anytime.
I swear I love you. I swear if that guy doesn't stop coughing.
Robitussin cough drops relieve coughs and soothe your throat fast. These really work.
First coughing, now talking. I can't go on.
Robitussin cough drops from the cough experts.
Luciano Pavarotti. Few can resist his warm, charismatic smile or his stunning music. Today, his famous Three Tenors concerts are enjoyed by millions around the world. Tutti proudly presents Pavarotti, the music and the story. A special collector's edition 2-CD set with over 2 hours of Pavarotti's very best performances, plus his incredible life story. Call now to receive the ultimate Pavarotti collection, a 2-CD set, plus his life story, all for the introductory price of only $26.95. And it's not available in stores. Luciano Pavarotti, this century's most legendary superstar. Here's how to order. To order the Pavarotti collection, call the number on your screen or send check or money order for the amount shown on the screen, plus shipping and handling. Rush deliveries available. Call now.
People are talking to people. They'll soon say yes. You won't believe it.
You can believe it. Sprint's great dime-a-minute rate just got better. Not just a little better. No way. Sprint said,
let's give them something to talk about.
And this is it. Call for Sprint Cents and you'll pay just 10 cents a minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to the number you call most often. So call now and start talking. And when you sign up for Sprint Cents, there's no confusion about what you're paying. It's always just 10 cents a minute on all your other state-to-state calls to anywhere in the country. Every evening, every night, and all weekend long.
Let's give them something to talk about.
On top of that, you'll get 10% cash back after your first year with Sprint. So call now. Get 10 cents a minute all day to the number you call most. Call now. 1-800-621-9046.
For the last 2 weeks, we've been bringing you a battle over money and love from California involving the estate of the late Jerry Garcia, former leader of the Grateful Dead band, as well as of the Jerry Garcia band. Right now, we're showing you highlights of testimony given earlier this week by Jerry Garcia's third wife. The battle here is over an agreement that Garcia allegedly reached with his second wife that would provide her $5 million over 20 years. That means roughly $20,000 a month, and it's been contested by his third wife, his widow, who says it's not a valid agreement. Right now, the lawyer representing Carolyn Adams' second wife has just begun to cross-examine the third wife about the fact that she, too, says she's entitled to $20,000 a month or thereabouts, but her $20,000 wouldn't bankrupt the estate, but Carolyn's would.
During that period of time that he was dispersing that sum for your benefit, that is 1994 and 1995, what was your personal income?
$300,000 a year.
Okay. To be exact, and if you don't remember the exact amount, would you please look at what is Exhibit B to the petition, which is a letter dated March 13, 1996, by the Gelfand firm. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. And you commissioned the Gelfand firm to make a determination, did you not, of what your personal income was during 1994 and 1995 in connection with the application to the probate court for a family allowance?
Yes, my personal attorney, Claire Springs, did.
Okay. And what was the total earned income of yours, separate and apart from anything you were receiving from Jerry Garcia, for the tax year 1994?
$329,000.
And $329,875.
Okay.
And in 1995 tax year, what was the amount represented by the, determined by the Gelfand firm that was your personal income during that time?
$386,000. 372.
Right. It was $386,000. $372. Okay.
Let me ask you a question just for my of interest. What is Signs of Life?
That's my film company.
That's your film company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. So this, of course, was during the period that Jerry Garcia was laboring under strong financial pressure. Is that correct? 1994 and 1995.
Well, he had a lot of obligations, and
okay.
Yeah.
Now, in connection with your request to the probate court on April 25th of 1996 to inform the probate court as co-executor about the financial condition of the estate, what did you represent to the probate court? And I refer you to page 2 of the first new exhibit, W31, beginning at line 14 to line 21. What you represent?
Is that the same document that we were just looking at?
W31 is the top document, the petition before inventory for family allowance.
And what paragraph, please?
The paragraph beginning at line 14 through line 21.
Petitioner is informed and believes that the estate is solvent.
You can read this out.
Oh.
And you represented at that time the estate was solvent, did you not?
Well, it's solvent without the claims. You know, it's solvent in itself, having not worked out how many claims were going to be involved.
Well, you also represented at the same time, did you not, that it was sufficient to meet your requested family allowance?
Yes.
Of how much? How much did you request?
I can't remember.
How much did you request?
I can't remember. I'm not sure.
Refresh your recollection that you request, and you have a pending request at the estate.
Yes.
That you received $18,000 a month as a family allowance?
Yes, that sounds right.
And you represented, did you not, in this petition, that even considering that request and the other obligations of the estate would be solvent?
Yes.
Now, at almost the same time as this petition for family allowance was being filed, in fact, a day before the family allowance was being filed, You made a representation to this court, did you not, about the financial condition of the estate on the subject of whether or not this court should allow Carolyn Adams Garcia attorney fees to carry on this proceeding? You recall that?
That's right.
Okay. And in that, you opposed that, did you not?
Yes.
Okay. And
Well, in that context, what he was about to point out is that she said the estate was insolvent for purposes of Carolyn Adams Garcia. Professor Sturck, is this just an attempt by Mr. Phillips to make this witness look bad by showing that it was okay for her to have money but not Carolyn Adams, or is there something more? Is there another level to this?
No, I think that what Mr. Phillips is trying to do is to show that there is money in this estate, that Jerry Garcia was not insolvent, that the allegations that that this settlement agreement was totally out of proportion from the estate was just not true. And what he's trying to do is to show that if a reasonable person, such as Deborah Coons Garcia, was asking and receiving allowances in the neighborhood of $18,000 to $20,000 a month from the estate, the assumption everybody must have been working under is that there was real money in this estate, that Jerry Garcia was not broke.
But then what's the relevance of bringing out the fact that she made $384,000 in 1995?
Oh, I think there's a little bit of to show that there's a little bit of greed in the claim here, that this is not a woman who needs Jerry Garcia's money in order to survive. This is not a spouse who is simply looking to make sure that she can make ends meet.
And to the extent that there is some use or questioning of her use of the word solvent, or just to be clear, what does solvent mean? I mean, I assume that it means that you are, well, I was going to use another slang word, flush, but what does solvent mean?
Well, I think in this case, when one asks whether the estate is solvent, the question one's asking is, are the assets that the estate has greater than the estate's debts?
Because we're all solvent if we ignore it.
If we ignore the debts, everybody's solvent, exactly.
I think that, although on the other hand, on her behalf, it is probably fair to say that aspect of these applications is largely drawn by the lawyers and probably not studied in minute care, that kind of general language.
No, that's right, but nevertheless, she did hire her lawyers, and when she signs documents, she's stuck.
Got to live with it. Okay. Right. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have a chance to go out to talk to Clara Tuma. We always learn a lot from Clara, so stay with us. Welcome back. I think you're going to enjoy these last 90 minutes of our coverage of the hearing involving Jerry Garcia's estate coming from California. We have perhaps the most interesting witness of the trial, and also an exploration of a number of issues that have really been critical and will be critical to the outcome. As you know, it's partly about money and whether or not the second wife, Carolyn Adams Garcia, should get the $5 million she says she's been promised. It's also partly about love. And in fact, love has been one of the sub-themes, the sub-motifs of this particular hearing. And now we're going to go out and talk to Clara Tuma, who's our expert on many things, including the subject of love letters. Good afternoon, Clara.
Good afternoon, Raymond.
Tell us about love letters, and especially how love letters have played a role in the testimony of Carolyn Adams Garcia.
Well, Raymond, there is a love letter in particular that is a critical piece of evidence in this case, because during Carolyn Adams Garcia's testimony, she's wife number 2, she is the woman known as Mountain Girl. During her testimony a couple of weeks ago, she tearfully read part of a love letter from Jerry Garcia. She told the judge she wasn't sure when it was written, but she thought it was probably during the 80s, which would have been the time period she was married to Jerry Garcia. And the reason her attorney brought that out was to try and show that this was a love-filled marriage. Well, boy, things sure changed dealing with that love letter yesterday and today when the attorney for the estate began questioning her more about the events in that letter. It is an undated letter, and the attorney went... There are several things mentioned in that, people that Jerry Garcia had seen. There are events mentioned. So the attorney went person by person, event by event, trying to narrow down the time frame, because it is his contention that that love letter was written back in 1968, well before Jerry and Carolyn Garcia got married in 1981.
Now, one of the other witnesses we'll be showing our viewers, in addition to showing the section of testimony about Carolyn that you just described, is a member of the band, Phil Lesh. Did his testimony touch in any way on the subject of the dating of that important love letter?
Well, he did. In the letter from Jerry Garcia, there is a mention that he and the Grateful Dead had played in Athens, Ohio the night before. Well, there is a book out of almost memorabilia from the Grateful Dead telling exactly when they played concerts, and it turns out that they only played in Athens, Ohio once. That was in 1968. When Phil Lesh testified, he is one of the original members of the Grateful Dead. He verified that date and says he distinctly remembers playing it because it's the only time the group went to Athens, because they had played at a nearby venue one night, and he said the only people in the audience were college students who had come over from Athens. So he said the members of the Dead decided, well, the next night they would go to Athens and play a free concert. He said that was the only time they actually did that in Athens, Ohio. So he said he can pinpoint that date as being in 1968, and that may well damage Carolyn's credibility when she said she wasn't sure when that letter was written, but she thought it was probably during her marriage in the 80s.
When Lesh was called as a witness, he was called by the estate. What was their purpose in calling him aside from helping on the love letter?
Well, Phil Lesh was a reluctant witness for either side. In fact, Raymond, the first thing he said when he got on the witness stand was that he didn't want to be there. He was subpoenaed. He was in court because he was subpoenaed. And as soon as his testimony was out, he was out of this courthouse. I followed him out of court and was maybe 15 steps behind him. And by the time I got to the door, he was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't in the elevator, couldn't find him in the stairwell. So he was eager to have this testimony concluded. The reason the estate wanted Phil Lesh to testify concerned that testimony about whether he saw Carolyn Garcia, wife number 2, with Jerry Garcia on a series of Grateful Dead concerts. She originally testified that she thought she was on about 50 tours. She then later said that during the marriage, she thought that she was probably on maybe 15 different events, not necessarily entire tours, but 15 different events with Jerry Garcia. She said most of her touring was done in the 70s at a time before she had children and before family commitments kept her at home more. Well, the estate called Phil Lesh to see if that was true because, after all, as one of the original members of the Dead, he was at every Grateful Dead concert. He testified that he didn't see Carolyn Garcia much on tour in the 60s. He said that's mainly because the band was just getting started and nobody took their family members with them in the 60s. But he also said he didn't see her much in the 70s and he did not remember seeing her much in the 80s on tour with the band. Again, the estate trying to try and damage Carolyn Garcia's credibility on what she told the judge earlier in the trial.
Now, in terms of flavor, this witness, Phil Lesh, in some ways seems to have encapsulated what the Dead was about more than any other witness, with a certain amount of humor and humanity.
Well, he did. In fact, not only the audience, but the lawyers and even the judge broke out in laughter several times during his testimony when he was asked to describe Jerry Garcia, his longtime friend, his co-worker, fellow band member. He said he was a cool dude. He also was asked about a time period during which he and Carolyn Garcia and Jerry Garcia may have lived in the same house. Now, this is a famous address at 710 Ashbury in San Francisco, and members of the Grateful Dead toured that house. It was almost a stop on tours for many years to see where the Grateful Dead had really gotten started, because it was really a cultural center for the hippie community. It was almost a commune. People came and stayed as long as they want to and left, just a communal type of living. And when he was asked whether Carolyn Garcia moved into that house before he moved out, he said he couldn't really remember because it was pretty hazy to him. And when asked if he meant that specific year, and he said, oh no, the last 30 years are hazy to me. And everybody in the courtroom, including the judge, laughed at his reference to what appeared to be maybe some of the drugs that he's used through the years.
Well, Clara, we know you're never hazy, always focused, so give us some specifics on what we can expect next in this hearing as it proceeds.
Well, Phil Lesh has finished his testimony and he is off the stand. We are still in the estate section of the case, and they are expected to call about half a dozen more witnesses, several of whom the estate says are acquaintances or business associates of Jerry Garcia, and the estate wants to call them to say that Jerry Garcia married Carolyn Garcia for tax purposes. That is part of the contention, that this was never a love-based marriage, that instead it was a marriage for convenience. Carolyn Garcia wanted to get married. Jerry Garcia was told that he would save money on taxes. At least that's the estate's contention. So they are likely to call business acquaintances of Jerry Garcia to try and further that contention. After the estate's case, it looks like we will have about a day of rebuttal testimony from Carolyn Garcia's attorney and then closing arguments. Now, next week is, of course, New Year's, so court only meets Monday, Thursday, and Friday, and the lawyers say that they are hoping to complete testimony on Thursday and perhaps have closing arguments on Friday. But at the conclusion of closing arguments, of course, the judge will take it under advisement. He is not expected to issue a ruling for about a week.
Well, Clara, since I probably won't see you until then, have a Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year, Raymond.
Okay. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a moment with Carolyn Adams Garcia and Phil Lesh. Stay with us.
That's 1-800-931-1700.
I'm not sure that many of us suspected that at the time we began bringing you the hearing of the Garcia estate, that's the estate of Jerry Garcia, the songwriter, that a critical exhibit would be not a document relating to finances or money, but a love letter. But so it was. Carolyn Adams Garcia, testifying early in the hearing in support of her $5 million agreement, showed a love letter which she said probably was written during the time of her marriage. We're now going to show you a highlight of a cross-examination by the estate's attorney just yesterday, in which he attempted to establish it was written much earlier and therefore doesn't serve the purpose for which it was offered.
You were testifying in response to direct examination that you and Jerry had a loving relationship during your marriage, correct?
That's correct.
And in support of that, you cited this letter as having come to you during your marriage, indicating some very touching sentiments. Isn't that correct?
That's right.
Objection, Your Honor. The form of the question, it's still an argument of counsel properly made to the court.
Well, the letter was read at a poignant time in the trial.
She answered yes, Your Honor.
Yes, so you can go into it.
All right, now, first of all, you know, in this two-page letter, I notice, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that Jerry makes no reference to Annabelle or Teresa. You notice that?
I see that, yes.
You see that? Well, was that like Jerry?
I don't know how to respond to that. Was that like Jerry?
Well, yeah. Was he simply didn't mention his children, say hello to the kids, or how are they? Was that like Jerry?
I don't know how to respond to that. I don't think that that's a fair question.
You think what?
I don't think that's a fair question.
Well, let me ask you this question. Could it be that this letter was written before they were born? And your relationship was very new and very fresh?
No, I don't think so, but I did get some letters from Jerry back then, but
like this?
We were corresponding, and my belief was that we were corresponding in the 80s, and that was when it was, but...
You mean that's when this was? That's when W15 was, in the 80s. Is that what you meant to say?
Well, I think so.
Okay, well, let's keep talking about it. Please look at the letter. And let's look at the front page. Let's look at the first sentence. Quote, "We flew into Chicago Airport to be greeted by 2 Lincoln Continental limousines. Immense, extremely sumptuous." End quote. Now, tell me, when did Jerry start getting met at airports by limousines and being impressed by it? In the 80s?
No, I don't know, probably earlier than that.
Probably the 60s, wouldn't you say?
No.
Well, let's keep it quiet. Although this late in the afternoon, a little humor never hurts.
All right, now let's look at the next sentence. Does that unsettle you a little bit about this being in the 80s, the limousine reference?
Well, I don't know what to say. This is a letter. I was searching my documents. You asked me for this stuff. I had like a couple of days to come up with things. You wanted anything after November 19th, 1975? That's a very long time. And I had a lot of stuff to go through. I found a letter. I brought it.
Did that unsettle you, the reference to the limousines? that this was written in the 80s? Yes or no?
Not really. I don't see what that has to do with anything.
Well, it has to do with the timing of it, if it's a hint, and that's what I'm asking for.
It depends on what band he was touring with or what was going on.
All right, well, let's find out. What's the next sentence?
Certainly some of the bands that Jerry toured with used station wagons and vans and whatever they had.
Let's look at the next sentence. Quote, then to the motel. This one pretentious as can be. Patterned fabric wallpaper, low slung mock colonial modern chest of drawers, brass handles, and wood finish antique. Ornate bedspread, a little above with two chairs.
I think that word is alcove.
Oh, thank you. A little alcove with two chairs, a table covered with...
I think that's near leather.
Thank you, near leather, overhanging light, a large mirror with a gold-flecked looker, and an antique frame, color TV, exclamation point. You see that?
Yes, I think he was being humorous. Being humorous.
You think that when Jerry wrote you this letter from Chicago, and he put color TV exclamation point, he wasn't really impressed by having a color TV in the room. He was just kidding. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'd just like to point out that sometimes they'd get into hotels and they'd be so perfectly horrible that there was a subject matter of a lot of guffawing. And I laughed when I saw this. I thought it was funny.
This did not unsettle you when you reviewed it again to bring it to the deposition and to court, that this might not have been written in the 80s.
I don't think I paid attention to that part.
I see. Well, let's read on. Now, he mentions in the second paragraph, I should say the third paragraph, some people. He mentioned Babs, B-A-B-B-S. What was Babs? Did you know of Babs?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, what was Babs' last name?
Oh, his name is Ken Babs.
Oh, Ken Babs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and was he with the band?
I don't know. In this letter, it's kind of obscure what exactly was going on here. Ken Babs was part of the old Mary Prankster retinue, and often would show up out on the road at Grateful Dead shows, just to kind of goof around.
When's the last time you know that Ken Babs showed up at one of the Grateful Dead shows?
Pretty recently. I know for sure he was at the concert in 1982, 1983 in the Eugene area, which is where he lives.
All right, what about Gretsch?
Mm-hmm.
What was Gretsch's full name?
Gretsch, that's her nickname. That was her prankster nickname. The full version of which was Gretchen Fetchin, the Slime Queen.
Mm-hmm.
And her kids. So she was Ken Babs's wife at that time.
All right. Let's turn over to the next page. Now, about 7 lines down, Jerry says, quote, cops unplug at 12 o'clock, but it's cool. Nobody busted, no hassle. After standing out by the rent-a-car, about 20 people, local musicians, local photographers, artists, young hippies, college types, spades, a few guys who called themselves greasers, and so on. Questions and answers. Maybe a few doors opened, hopefully, unquote. Now, what did you understand him to mean, Jerry Garcia, that maybe a few doors opened, hopefully?
I'm not sure. Perhaps he was talking about the doors of consciousness.
Perhaps. Perhaps he was talking about business opportunities or possible gigs. Did that occur to you?
I'm not sure. I don't exactly know what he's talking about here.
Well, look at it. Doesn't that seem to be a reasonable interpretation? Maybe a few doors open, hopefully?
Local musicians and artists and young hippies? It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense in the 80s, but it makes sense in the 60s, doesn't it?
It has a 60s type sensibility to it, but I'm not going to qualify it because I don't exactly know what he was talking about.
So you don't
whether he was talking about helping people to get some insight into what his life was like, because Jerry was a very friendly, gregarious person, and when he would find himself surrounded by a crowd of people outside a show, he would often spend half an hour to three-quarters of an hour talking to everybody.
Yes,
and it was not unusual for him to do that.
I know, I've heard that about him, but do you accept, speaking of hints, the possible interpretation, and a reasonable interpretation, that he was looking for opportunities to play?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
Okay.
I think he had a pretty full schedule already.
Well, he did in the 80s, but did he in the 60s?
Yes, when they went on tour, they always were very tightly booked.
All right. Let's look now at the next line. Quote, then drive to Columbus, me at the wheel, Bill, Jonathan, Jackson, my cowering passengers, quote, look out for that truck, unquote. Now, what bill was that?
I have no idea.
You have no idea. What Jonathan was that?
I'm uncertain. It could have been. There was a couple of Jonathans.
What were their last names?
Well, there was Jonathan Reister.
Jonathan Reister, and who else?
I can't think of another one right now.
All you can think of is Jonathan Reister, right?
Well, at this moment, yes.
And what was Jonathan Reister in connection to the Grateful Dead?
Sort of a hanger-on.
Kind of a hanger. He worked with the crew, didn't he?
I never saw Jonathan Reister work.
When is the last time Jonathan Reister was with the Grateful Dead?
With? I don't know. He was.
Does 1969 refresh your recollection?
No, the last time I saw him was just a couple of years ago at a show. He shows up all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about Jackson? What Jackson does that refer to in this letter you say you got in the 80s?
Well, there was a Jackson that worked for the band.
How about Rex Jackson?
There was a Rex Jackson who the Rex Foundation is named after.
That's right, of which you're a member, right?
Of course I remember him.
I'm sorry, I said of which you are a member.
I was.
You were. And Rex Jackson was killed in an automobile crash in 1976. Isn't that true? Or don't you know that?
I don't know what year he was killed. I know he was killed in an accident here in Mill Valley. And we memorialized him with the Rex Foundation.
I just was looking through Captain Tripp's, being prepared for trial.
I can't believe you read this stuff.
Well, a lawyer's got to read everything he can, and it seems that the result of Mr. Camara's reading, coupled with other investigation, has been to take a document with no date on its face and maybe pin it down to an area that helps the estate.
Well, I think that's right, or at least what it does is it undermines the weight to which the Carolyn Garcia's claim attached to that letter. That is, the attempt was to show that there was a loving relationship for a long time, and during the course of the marriage, there was an attempt to show that the marriage was not, as the estate claimed, simply for tax purposes. And this letter, which was so lovingly read, tearfully read by Carolyn Garcia, was supposed to be evidence of that fact. But to the extent the letter was written long before the marriage, it does reduce whatever weight the letter might have.
Actually, both lawyers have obviously been pretty well prepared in a lot of nuances, but essentially, while it would probably be the lawyer's job, the job of the lawyer presenting this letter, to have gone through this, at an earlier point that we didn't show, when she's asked about the letter, she says, well, I didn't analyze this love letter to Mr. Camara the way I think you're going to do it, suggesting that she had produced it kind of as just another of a pile of documents. But if you're going to present it as meaning something, you've got to really be prepared for this kind of cross.
Well, I can imagine Carolyn just presenting the letter as part of a pile of documents, but to the extent that her lawyer was questioning her about the letter and trying to use the letter for her claims purposes, I think her lawyer probably didn't do her a service without doing the kind of investigation Mr. Camara did of the letter.
And for a well-prepared lawyer, that can be frustrating because they say that, you know, the hounds can lose 1,000 times, the fox can only lose one. Stay with us. Phil Lesh, when we come back, the most amusing and interesting witness perhaps of the trial.
Tonight on Primetime Justice, the verdict in a disturbing case from Florida where a 13-year-old girl shot and killed her 14-year-old friend. You'll also hear testimony from the defendant's mother who gave her...
Welcome back to Court TV. We're bringing you more of the hearing involving Jerry Garcia's estate. Now on the witness stand, we're going to show you some highlights of Phil Lesh, a man who was a founding member of the Grateful Dead band, a friend of Jerry Garcia, and a very reluctant witness at this hearing called by the estate.
Thank you. If you would please state your full name for the record, then spell your last name.
The last name is spelled Lesh, L-E-S-H, Philip Chapman Lesh.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Lesh, are you appearing here as a witness pursuant to subpoena?
Yes, I am.
And is it fair to say that you're appearing as a reluctant witness in this litigation?
Absolutely.
Did you, in fact, ask to be excused from having to respond to the subpoena?
That's correct.
Now, it's true, is it not, that you've been on friendly terms in the past with both Carolyn Adams Garcia and Deborah Coons Garcia?
That's true.
And you feel a reluctance to say anything that would adversely affect either one of them, is that right?
That's correct.
However, you are resolved, as you just sworn, to tell the truth, correct?
That's correct.
Now, are you married?
Yes, I am.
And you live in Marin County?
That's correct.
And you have children?
Yes, 2.
And their ages?
10 and 7.
And your age?
56.
Now, were you one of the original members of the Grateful Dead band?
That's correct.
And who were the other original members?
Aside from Jerry, there was Bill Kreutzmann, a drummer, Bob Weir, the guitar player, and Ron McKernan, organist, harp player, and vocalist.
Now, when is the first time that, as a group, you constituted a musical band known as the Grateful Dead?
Well, that would be in late 1965.
And how long were you a member of the Grateful Dead band?
All the way.
All the way, and that's...
30 years.
And you never, there was no hiatus in your membership and participation with the band, was there? You were always there?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the Jerry Garcia band in relation to the Grateful Dead band?
It was a band that Jerry formed in order to perform outside of the Grateful Dead.
All right. Now, at some point, did the Grateful Dead begin touring to play engagements outside of California?
Yes, yes, they did at some point.
And when did that first begin?
It was about June 67, I believe.
And let's see, how old were you then?
27.
27. Now, in addition to the musicians in the Grateful Dead band itself, at some point the Grateful Dead band acquired a crew. Is that right?
That's right.
And what did the crew do?
Well, they hauled the equipment around and set it up for us and, on stage and tore it down after we were finished. And
So they worked at home when you played here, and they also went on the road with you.
that's correct.
All right. Did you tell me when you first acquired a crew, if I didn't know?
We had a one-man crew in the late 65. Up to that point, we hauled our own equipment.
Okay, and ultimately, how many members constituted your crew at the max?
At the end, in 1995, anywhere from 20 to 30.
Now, when did Steve Parrish start with the Grateful Dead?
I'm a little hazy on that, but I think it might have been in the early 70s, 71, 72. I really don't remember.
All right.
Seems like he's been there forever.
What was his role?
He became a member of the crew, doing the same things that all the crew members did. And later on, he became Jerry's personal Jerry and Bob's, guitar technician.
Now, was there ever a member of the band or the crew by the name of Rex Jackson?
Yes, there was.
And when did Rex Jackson start? What was he, a band member or a crew member?
No, he was a crew member.
And when did Rex Jackson start as a crew member for the Grateful Dead?
Late 60s, early 70s, again, I'm not sure.
Okay. What became of Rex Jackson?
He was killed in an automobile accident.
When?
1976.
You're sure of that?
Yes, I am.
Now, was there a member of the band or the crew by the name of Jonathan Reister?
I think
R-E-I-S-T-E-R.
I think that's Reister, and yes,
Reister.
He was the road manager.
He was the road manager?
Yes, for a time in the late 60s.
In the late 60s?
That's correct.
Well, when did he cut all ties with the Grateful Dead?
70, 71, somewhere in there.
70 or 71. Now, in addition to being a member of the band, what was your personal relationship with Jerry Garcia himself?
Well, we had been friends since 1959, since well before the band started up.
Okay, and you knew him all the time up until his death?
Yeah.
And you had frequent contact with him?
Yes.
Now, can you describe Jerry Garcia's personality to us?
He was a cool dude.
A cool dude? Could you elaborate?
How much time do you have?